Are you thinking of leaving corporate, but too afraid to make the move? Have you already escaped corporate, but are finding it hard to run your dream business? Are you wasting valuable time by attempting to figure challenges out on your own? We have created a podcast for corporate escapees running their own business. This is the Corporate Escapees Podcast by Build, Live, Give. We bring you firsthand experiences of guests going through many of the struggles you face each and every day as a corporate escapee. We get real with no corporate BS. And now, over to your host, Paul Higgins.
Welcome to the Corporate Escapees Experts Podcast. This is brought to you by Build, Live, Give. And Build, Live, Give is a community for corporate escapees rapidly growing their dream business, living a great life, and giving back. We have a paid membership called BLG Boost for corporate escapees wanting to get to 30K in monthly revenue. And we have a mastermind called BLG Titans for corporate escapees targeting 60,000 a month or more in revenue. And we've created the 5 rapid growth drivers to help simplify getting these results. And what we do is each episode is we take one of the key drivers and we deep dive into it with a global expert. So today we're going to take driver number 4, which is sales focus. And we've got an absolute star on podcasting and how to get on the right podcast. So what I'll do now is introduce you to Jeremy Slate from Command Your Brand Media. And he's going to talk to us about podcasting. So welcome to the show, Jeremy.
Hey, Paul. Thanks for having me, man. I'm excited to chat with your people today.
Yeah, brilliant. So why don't we start with you just giving the audience a little abridged version of how you became such an expert in podcasting?
Well, I never intended to be. My background by education is I was actually a teacher. I studied Catholic theology, then I studied literature at New College, Oxford, and came back and got my master's in classics. So we did a lot of Latin and stuff like that. And I had been a podcast listener since like 2009. So I've been in the podcast space for a long, long time. I started out listening to a podcast that makes fun of the news called No Agenda, which is really, really funny. Still listen to it to this day. And it really kind of got me started in that space. And I went through a bunch of different business ventures before I ended up realizing, all right, well, let me try and start a podcast to help educate people in the business space, because I wanted to learn from experts. And if I'm interviewing those experts, I can help other people learn from that as well. So at this point in time, as we speak, I've been doing this for about 3 years. I've done almost 400 episodes. We are closing in on 1 million downloads. And it's gotten me featured in Forbes a couple times, Inc., named a top 27 podcast to listen to the last 2 years by CIO. And that also led to me creating my current business, which is Command Your Brand Media, helping people get on the right podcasts.
Excellent. And how do you sort of keep abreast with what's current in podcasting, or more importantly, what's going to happen in the future with podcasting?
Well, first of all, I'm a huge podcast nerd. I don't know about you, Paul, but I'm always listening to something. And right now, I have been stuck on a show called Case File, which I think comes out of Australia as well. I'm not 100% sure because the host goes by the name Anonymous, which looks at different stories and stuff in the world of crime. So I'm always listening to different podcasts, always listening to new ones to enrich, what I'm doing and kind of immerse myself in that space. I also go to a ton of events. We went to Podcast Movement. We went to, I was an icon of influence for New Media Summit last year, attended Podfest. So we're doing a lot of stuff, and also doing a lot of speaking on the subject as well. So I'm really engaged with what's happening in the space. I deal with a lot of podcasters on a daily basis. So I really, and with our business, I'm very ingrained in what's going on in the podcasting space, because we have to help customers get booked on the right shows. So I've really been ingrained in that space, and you know a lot about what's going on in the daily day-to-day, even like as something as simple as the whole idea of new and noteworthy in iTunes hasn't changed in 2 years. Those shows have actually been locked there. So if you were when they closed it, you are very lucky to be getting free promo still. So I've really just had my finger on the pulse to what's going on there.
Yeah, and where do you see it going? Where do you see podcasting in, a year, 2 years' time? What are some of the key trends that you're seeing?
Well, here's the interesting thing, Paul, is I think Gary Vee's kind of banging the gong for this, is we see a lot of people talk about video and things like that, but audio is just way more available to people, right? It's still about 80 to 90% of all podcasts listened to are audio only. So you're getting access to people's lives in different ways that you couldn't before. Their commute, while they're working, even while I'm here with employees, I usually have one earbud in listening to a podcast when I'm not on a call. So you're getting access to people's lives in a way you couldn't before. And you're also getting a way niched down audience, because I think radio for years and years and years has done this whole thing with Nielsen ratings where they're talking about, well, we're getting this many million listens, and they can't really qualify that. They can't really quantify it. Whereas podcasts, we have hard numbers, and we also are very niched down in certain topics, and you really couldn't do that before. We were able to communicate with people that weren't really able to go as specific as you are right now to even like different things people are handling in their lives because of the type of show they're listening to. So because of that, I just see it continuing to grow. But the thing I think that means for content creators is we really have to stay hyper niched with what we're doing, because there aren't many people that are going to be able to do like what John Lee Dumas has done and a lot of these different shows, because it's very hard to cast a wide net now, like a lot of these shows did early on. So unless you're niched and unless you're differentiating, for the most part, you're not going to be able to separate yourself from the pack. So you have to figure out what is different that you can offer. And I think that's the direction that content creators are going. They're just going to have to create something better that is different than what everybody else is doing.
Yeah. And what are some tips on creating that niche? Like, how do you help people? Because a lot of our audience either want to get on podcasts, and we'll certainly get to that in a moment, because I know you're,
Sure.
You're brilliant at helping people do that, but also want to launch their own. So how do you go about really defining that niche?
I think for some people it's tough. For me, it was tough. Early on, I didn't quite know. And it was through doing more episodes, getting my own story down, and really interacting with the people that started listening to me is really how I niched down. But I think a lot of times you have to understand first and foremost, like what your mission is. Like, what are you here to do? What's your purpose to do? And it's, a good idea to use this stuff to promote yourself, but you don't want to be self-promotional in doing it, if that makes sense. Because it's really first and foremost about education and motivation. That's why a lot of people are listening to this stuff. So you have to figure out how you can help people in that specific way. And I'm not a huge believer in the whole idea of create your perfect avatar and things like that. I'm really about hone down on your message, hone down on how you can help, and then try and take the viewpoint of a listener. It's really interesting when you do that. Try and take the viewpoint of a listener and have your line of questioning go through answering those questions that you think that listener would be asking this guest. And for me, that's really helped my audience to win a lot with what I'm doing.
Yeah. And then, is there a magic number? Like, some people say, you just got to be patient for 3 months, 6 months. Like, what's your experience of how long do you have to go before you do pivot if the message isn't meeting your listeners or not meeting your audience?
That's tough. I don't think there's really a magic number, because there's also this whole idea of the consistency as well, so that you feel like you're good at it. Like me, I didn't feel like I was a good interview until I did 200 episodes. Like then I felt like, okay, I'm pretty good at this. I can handle this. And I know Jordan Harbinger from Art of Charm has talked about he didn't feel great until he did 500. So in terms of that, I think sometimes to pivot early on, you don't know yourself well enough yet that it's difficult to do that. So it's kind of a balance of listening to what your audience is asking for, because I get a lot of emails and things like that. And also realizing like where you're at in your own development. So that's kind of this interesting balance there. There is no magic number. I'd like to say there is, but there really isn't.
Sure. And look, what I'd love to dive in now is, a lot of our audience really would love to get onto a podcast. Some have got their own, and as that builds, they really want to do podcast outreach, get on some of the bigger audiences so they can create more value for the listeners of other people's podcasts. What are some of the key challenges you see day to day of people trying to get onto the right podcasts?
Well, I'm trying to think of where the best place to start with this is, Paul, because there's also like a lot of people just don't have the basics in. You know what I mean? And it's because a lot of times people don't know what that is. And it's because not a lot of us know how PR works. And luckily for me, I had a wife that's been in PR for 10 years. So she helped me with a lot of that. And I think the problem is people don't understand like how their website should look, how they should be presented, how their story should be positioned, and even like who they should be talking to. So I see those as a lot of huge challenges early on. And people don't quite know how to approach the medium. Especially, I see this especially for, I don't know if you've seen this, but I see this especially for people that have been on radio and TV a lot, we're very different than those mediums, but people think they can conduct themselves on this medium like those, and they're not the same. So that's really some of the challenges I see up front. We can definitely, if you want, we can get into the solutions, which I'd love to chat with your audience about, but that's really what I see.
So when someone is, lacking the basics, what's your advice? How do you try to solve them yourself? Do you get someone else to help you? What have you seen work in the past?
Definitely. So that's a great question, because there's some basic things that a lot of people should have in when they're reaching out to podcasts or even media of any sort. And one of the things is having their website put together in such a way that positions them as an opinion leader. It doesn't mean that has to be this like several $1,000 site. It just means like have your graphic design be good, have a bio page on your site, which talks about you, written in third person. Like all of your copy on your website should be written in third person, because it makes it sound like you have a team, even if you don't. And also your contact form, the way that's written on your site, and talks about business and press opportunities, a member of our team, like I said, doesn't matter if you have a team, will reach out to you. So that's important as well. But then the big thing is having a media page on your site. And so for people that don't know what that is, you have one page on your website, which has links to all the articles you've been on, podcasts you've been on, logos from those sites and things like that, because you're basically collecting them all in one place to show that you are an opinion leader. And the thing I hear people struggle with this early on is they're like, oh, I don't have any press. I don't have a lot of these things. So the thing I tell people to think about is think about what your small pond is. Think about that small place where you have some influence and can start out with. And for me, I found a local newspaper that was sent in the mail here every week on a Thursday. And I sent them all my press releases, and they ran them on their online site and in their actual print edition. So we actually started with that stuff as my media page on my site and started building that up. The other thing is having on your site a speaker one sheet, which is the one piece of paper that has your name on it, your social media links, your bio, your talking points, things like that. And once you have all those basics in, and like what your purpose is for being on podcasts, like what do you want to talk about, then it's time to start looking at like what you're going to talk about on those shows and actually looking for those shows.
Brilliant. And what are some of the other key challenges that you find? Because there's a huge amount of demand for very few really high downloadable podcasts. So what are some of the other key challenges people face in trying to get onto shows like that?
Well, I think one thing is like a well-written pitch, because the thing, if you don't come up with a great pitch, then your chances of actually getting on the show aren't very good. And I think also being understaffed, right? Like a lot of us are, if we're new in our business or we're solopreneurs, or, since we're talking to corporate escapees, like maybe they just don't have anybody hired yet. So time can be a huge factor in actually doing that. And, in that case, you may want to hire a company or bring on a VA or something like that, someone to help you in that process, because time can be a massive factor early on. And another thing is credibility. Like if you haven't built up a portfolio of different shows that you've been on, which is why I tell everybody start small and work yourself big, then it can also be difficult to get on shows as well.
Yeah, great. And as far as a lot of people do direct outreach versus using, some form of service. I know that you provide a brilliant service. What are some of the reasons why you'd go direct versus using a service?
Well, it depends, because I think a service, like it's just, you go with people that, we know podcasters, we work with podcasters in the space. And if you're going to go direct, it's just because you're starting out on your own, you know what I mean? Or you already have the contacts because you're a podcaster yourself. And that's one thing I've seen for people that have their own podcasts, is they find it a little bit easier to approach others because they have a show. So you're kind of like on, not quite even footing, but you're in the same ballpark, if that makes sense. So you have an easier way of talking to people. So, that's really, I guess, the case I see there is, when you're going to work with a firm, it's more because they've worked with people in the space, they work with a lot of people, so they have the contacts. Whereas sometimes when you're underfunded or you're just getting started, you want to try and figure it out yourself, and that's totally fine if you're willing to put in the time. And if you start your own podcast, it kind of also helps you to be in the similar, I guess, ballpark and the same footing.
Yeah, and is there I know often events are a great way to get on
Oh,
people's
absolutely.
podcasts. Yeah, so tell me how you should approach someone at an event. What's sort of best practice for doing something like that?
Well, it depends, like, because there's the idea of this once again goes back to the idea if you have a podcast, it's a little bit easier, right? Because then you can approach somebody and say, hey, I'd love to interview you on my podcast. And then you can work out a swap with them. That's kind of a really easy way to do it. Another way is just networking with people at events and not really having that idea there of getting on shows. Having an idea of how can you help that person. You find out later on they have a podcast, they're much more willing to have you on their show. And that's really the best ways I've seen. I haven't seen a huge success with like running up to people and saying, hey, have me on your show. It's really about building a relationship in that way. And I see like really doing swaps as a great way to kind of get your foot in the door, because if you offer an interview, it's much easier to get an interview yourself.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And what I certainly also have seen work really well for some members in our community is actually adding, your point around adding value first. But, if there's something that's quite not, if you listen to a show and the show notes aren't quite right, or there's something that they can improve on, I've found that especially if you use Facebook Messenger, if you go and contact them and say, hey, look, I listened to episode whatever, it's fantastic, but, just letting you know, this needs to be slightly tweaked. When you ever go back to try to introduce someone to that show, or you try to get on that show yourself, they can go through Messenger and actually see where you've added value prior. And
Sure.
then you're actually building that relationship rather than just going, straight for would I love to be on your show. Have you seen techniques like that work well?
I have, but it's also a delicate balance as well, because you have to be careful how you phrase that, because you also don't want to like make the person you're approaching wrong. You know what I mean? I think sometimes unintentionally we do that, where somebody feels like you're correcting them. So you want to position it in such a way that you're helping and not saying, oh, you should have known this. You shouldn't have done it that way. So you just have to be careful in that way. I've seen it work pretty well when you figure out how you can add value to an influencer, because that's worked really, really well for me. So like, a lot of times understanding like what they have going on in their launch schedule. So like if they have a book coming out or something like that, and figuring out how you can add value around, that product launch or whatever it may be, also really helps in terms of doing different things. It may be, I'd love to write a Medium article on what you're doing. There's so many different ways, even when you think you have absolutely nothing, that you can build a connection and actually get on a show in that way.
Great. And what about referring them guests? Is that, if you believe you've got a great guest, is
Mm-hmm.
that perceived as adding value as well?
Well, here's one thing I like to do, Paul, is I like to do what I call, and I do this for any sort of an introduction, not just for guests. I call it a double opt-in referral. I ask both people if they'd like to meet the other person first, and then I do the intro, because it really comes from a place of, people are very willing on both sides to do it. So I call it the double opt-in. Hey, I have this great guest. Their name is XYZ. Would you love to have them on your show, or would you love to be on their show? So that makes it a lot easier to look at it that way, rather than just, kind of dumping it in their inbox, because you may upset both sides. You know what I mean? So I love doing what we call a double opt-in connection.
Great. And, you mentioned around adding or writing a Medium article, etc. I think that's a brilliant idea. What are some of the other value adds that you've seen work really well?
For me, I've written a lot of articles with people. I've kind of started with small sites like Secret Entourage. Then before they closed it, I was writing for Huffington Post and some of these other sites. So I've been able to build relationships through interviewing people for media features as well. And so that's something to really think about. And it doesn't have to be a big deal. Find a small site in your niche and work with it that way, because people love that help flow. You know what I mean? So if you don't have a podcast, you can do it that way. You can do a Facebook Live with them. But you always want to think about, when it is a new thing, of how you can offer value first, because it really does help you to set you up in the right way.
Great. And what are some of the key things to be a fantastic guest? What are some of the key things that can help you be prepared to be a fantastic guest on a podcast?
Well, I look at every interview as having three key components: a story, a message, and a call to action. And the thing you got to look at is like, story is the oldest thing we've had as human beings. Like it really is. It connects to people like on this primal level of who they really are. So And a lot of interviews, just like you did on this show, you asked me to quickly introduce myself to people and kind of like tell them where I'm at. A lot of shows are going to allow you to do that first. So story most of the time is going to come first, and it's going to allow you to really lay that down, emotionally connect with people. And then that also gives you permission then to talk to people what you want to talk to them about. And that leads us into the next thing, which is message. I tell people to not focus on too many things, but focus on one thing that they can have people walk away with, whether they buy something from them or not. And a lot of times because of that, people will want to work with them. And let me give you an example here of, let's say you want to talk about LinkedIn, right? You want to talk about LinkedIn marketing, long form content on LinkedIn, whatever it may be. You need to figure out where in your story LinkedIn changed your life, because now you've emotionally hooked people. So they're interested in what it is. You've kind of gotten the permission and showed that you are able to talk about what you're going to talk about. And then you lead them into, okay, well, I'm going to teach you this couple strategies that really worked for me, because you don't want to get too tactical, because podcasts are out there for a long time. So you want to deal more in strategies, because tactics are things that can change every so often. So you want to then lay out your strategies. And the thing I then like is leading them into a call to action that actually helps them apply what you just taught. So a lot of times I'm talking about podcast guesting on shows. So I'll give out a checklist on how to be a great podcast guest. And that actually takes people into my funnel then. And through that call to action, then people then have an opportunity to get something valuable from me every day. And also they have if they want to, an opportunity to work with me every day. So I give people an option for a call, along with some sort of educational video or something like that, which we actually just refilmed today. I'm really happy with how they came out. But you really want to think about how you can do that through your call to action, because the call to action is just not buy now. It's, hey, I'd like to help you with what I just taught you, take you through a process. And if we want to work together after that, great. If you want to just become part of my fan club and maybe refer people to me, that's great as well. So that really, you're giving people the ability to do that and making the appearance so much more valuable to you.
Yeah, excellent. And that call to action, what sort of works? So, you talk, there's maybe a checklist, there's, a cheat sheet, there might be a PDF of a particular framework. What are the things that you've seen work really well for a call to action?
Something that aids in application. So like a lot of those things, like you just said, are perfect. Even if you're going to do like a short webinar training, that still works, because it's going to help somebody apply what you just taught them. They may want some more information on it. Things I don't see work well are PDF copies of books. Book a call with me, because a lot of times people think a call means sale. So if you're going to do calls, have a checklist or something and push hard for the checklist. But in your funnel for that, offer a call at some point. And that's what we do on our own funnel. You want to really handle things that are going to not give people resistance to, want to work with you and connect with you.
Yeah, look, absolute, some great points. And as far as the preparation, so you're about to go onto a podcast. What sort of preparation do you recommend someone does prior to going on to a podcast?
Well, first of all, I definitely recommend listening to an episode of the show that you're going to be on, because I've seen it happen before. I had a guy that jumped on my show, and I think he thought we were like a talk radio show or something. He jumps on and goes, "Long time listener, first time caller." I'm like, wow, that's kind of weird. So you want to really just, you don't have to be an expert on the show you're going to be on, but you just want to show them the levity and respect of knowing a little bit about them and kind of knowing how their show flow works and things like that. Also, if you haven't been on an interview before, do a mock interview with somebody so that you feel comfortable enough that you're able to answer your questions and things like that in a not rote fashion, and actually be able to be flexible on it as well. Because I've had guests on before, and you've probably seen this as well, Paul, where I felt like the other person was reading. And it was a little bit weird because it's not conversational. Yes. So if that's something you haven't done before, don't feel weird. Just practice it with somebody. Find somebody that in your group or in your business or whoever it may be to do some practice runs with you before you've been on an interview before.
Yeah, great. Yeah, excellent advice. And what are the things that you've seen during an interview that don't work as well? What are the things to avoid when you're actually in the interview itself?
Well, one thing that's really tough is, let's say, when you're going to be on with a host, they have an idea of where they want the interview to go. Don't resist them. You know what I mean? Try and be flexible in that way. Another thing is trying to be too salesy can be very weird because people don't really want to listen to that. They want engagement, they want education, they want learning, things like that. So that's also something that's difficult as well. But also getting too much into facts and figures is tough too, because people start to fall asleep. They're not really interested. So those are things you really want to avoid. And there's also been like the weird situations here or there, like where you get somebody on and every time you ask them a question, they're like, well, check out my YouTube channel, check out this link, check out that link. For however much time you're there with the person, they want the host wants you to be the expert. So just be willing to give and willing to teach, because when you're scarce, it doesn't really help anybody.
No, I'll always remember a famous author that certainly for small businesses has written a couple of brilliant books, and he was interviewed, and I could tell that the host just wanted to get it over and done with as quick as possible. And even though they were brilliant as an author, had some really good content, they just made the interview so awkward. I listened to about a quarter of it and just couldn't even get through it.
Yeah, it's no fun for anybody, because it hurt it as a podcaster. It also hurts your own brand. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. And you could tell it was just like part of, I've already done 20 of these today. So, it's just this part of a PR circus. They weren't really there to add value to the listeners, which I know for you is really important. And just for everyone listening to this, Jeremy at the start said, how can I add value to your listeners? And that's why I'm here. And I think that's a real pro, and that's the key thing.
Well, I always tell people that's the most important question to ask, because even if I listen to an episode, your audience better. So I'm just here to follow your lead.
Yeah, brilliant. And what else? What are any other suggestions you've got, or great tips given all your experience for people that are looking to go on podcasts?
Well, the thing I always recommend to people is start small and kind of work your way up. Like there is no elevator. There's only stairs. So when I say small, you want to look for shows that have less than 50 episodes and less than 20 reviews, because they're going to be much, much easier to work with. Because any show that gets past 20 episodes has usually got a pretty good chance of sticking around. Anything before that doesn't make it, we call pod fading. So really look for that, and use different episodes as social proof to get the next level of episode. And you'll really see some great success with doing that. And also in the way that you write your pitch, there's two things to really look at: having a great subject line, because you need to get people to open it. And the other thing we talked about story, message, and call to action. In your pitch email, only talk about story and message. Everybody realizes you have a call to action, or there's no reason for you to be doing this. But focus on how you can help the audience and what your story and your message is, and keep it short and concise and to the point of, this is how I can help your audience.
Great. And where can people find examples of that? Or I know that people can use definitely services like yourself, but where else can they find examples of that to help them?
Well, we actually have a Facebook group where we talk about things like that, so that would be a great place. But also, you want to look at people that do a lot of pitching and take a look at what they're doing as well. So I think it's hard to give you an exact place where you can see a lot of examples. So if people want to ask me, I can definitely show them some stuff we've used before and seen some success with. But yeah, I wouldn't know the best place to send you there, just because I've generated a lot of my pitches on my own.
Yeah, sure. And as far as finding stats, so what's the best place to find stats? So you obviously, or where do you start to find shows that only got 20 episodes, and how do you sort of open up iTunes and start to do your research? Any tips on that?
Yeah. So the one thing I would take a look at is I know you have a little bit of an international audience as well. So the thing I always recommend is, the bulk of downloads in iTunes come in American iTunes. So you can actually, in iTunes, go all the way down to the bottom, and you can actually click on a flag, and it lets you change the country that you're looking at iTunes version of, because you're going to get the best stats through the American version of iTunes, unless you're intending to hit more of an international audience, and that's fine. So take a look at that, and you're going to get a more accurate rendering of it. And also, about 80% of all downloads still come through iTunes. So until somebody creates a better platform, or they're open their APIs, there's not really a better place to look. So you can actually go into, when you go into the podcast section in iTunes, you can go into main categories like business, health, things like that. And then you can niche down even smaller within those categories, and you can check top 200s for those categories. Now, those top 200s based on daily activity can change every 24 hours. So usually the big stat they're based on is number of new subscribes in a 24-hour period. So that's just a good thing to know, basically how they're ranked in that way. So that's really how that ranking system works. So what you want to do is look at ranking over a period of days, because let's say a show bumps up there for one day and then it's never there again. Well, that might not be a show to work with. They just had one really good day. So you may want to track that in a spreadsheet. They aren't ranked by reviews, but also look at number of reviews, because that social proof helps as well. And if you're looking for shows, and you're newer, you can also take a look for those bigger shows. If you go to the related tab underneath each individual show and see what listeners also subscribe to as well. But I'll tell you what, the thing I'm really hoping for in the future, Paul, is that they open their API at some point and that we can actually get some better statistics on it, because we have to base a lot of it on like website Alexa scores and social media and things like that.
Yeah, I think someone sort of mentioned that, iTunes have been brilliant at monetizing most things, but the thing they don't monetize well is podcasting. So, at the moment, the platform is brilliant and it's all for free, and they don't monetize it directly. So I don't know what they'll do, whether they'll, change that philosophy to try to monetize it, then to open it, or just say, look, we're never going to win on this one, and find another way. But what are your thoughts on that? Because I've certainly heard that in the trade, is that's some of the reason why the analytics is so poor.
Well, the big thing is Apple has always kept their APIs something that are closed. Like a lot of different applications allow you access their APIs. Like Amazon does that and all these different things. But unless we get access to Apple's API, no developers can't even build anything. So that's the biggest thing, is they have to be willing to let people in. I know recently, for content creators, in their Podcast Connect platform, Apple released a beta stats program that lets the content producers see how they're doing. But in terms of content producers, the best thing we have is still our hosting accounts. So as a podcaster, you'll have a company that hosts all your files. For me, I use Libsyn, and that then goes to iTunes, and they'll tell you what a lot of your tracking looks like. But for the most part, there's nothing publicly available. So I'd love to see some sort of a solution in that place.
Yeah. And I think, and at the moment, there's no aggregator.
No.
If I got it right, that you've got to go into each country to basically get your downloads and do it manually. You can't pull all your downloads in one, other than through Libsyn.
Right, other than through Libsyn. And there's other aggregator apps out there, but just because the podcast app comes on iPhone, most people end up sticking with it. There's Overcast and there's different things out there, but there's no overarching solution as of yet.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, look, if I sort of summarize three key things, then I'd love to get some actions from you. But one is, I think, just get the basics right. And I think you gave some brilliant insights into getting a media page, your speaker one sheet, and getting someone to help with that. Certainly if you're a solopreneur, I think that's brilliant. And then also you talked around, using a valet service or someone to actually help you take that PR pitch and make it great, making sure there's a great subject line and making sure you really understand the audience and doing some great prep. And then also you talked about some brilliant ways of approaching people in events and making sure that you're adding value. I love that idea around using Medium and other things that you can add value to podcasters, and certainly starting small. So, starting at that 20 downloads and less, and really add value there, and then sort of build it. So that were some of the key things that I took. What are some of the key actions that you would love to leave the Build, Live, Give audience with today?
And I just want to add to what you just said, Paul. I just want to correct the last thing, just because I want your audience to totally get it. It's less than 20 reviews and less than 50 episodes is what to look for in iTunes. So just so they have that. So I feel like you really hit on everything there, man. You need to look a certain way. You need to approach. You need to have down what you want to talk about. You need to have your pitch down, and you just need to figure out exactly who you want to talk to. And I think self-awareness is kind of a big thing, because a lot of times we're big in our own space, but we're not big in the podcasting space yet. So you have to be willing to kind of humble yourself a little bit in the beginning and start building up that portfolio.
Excellent. And, as you've been listening to Jeremy sharing his wisdom, if you want to be supported in a community where we get other experts. We've got around 127 vetted experts around the world where I listen to podcasts like Jeremy. I listen to 2 hours a day at 2.5 times speed and sort of get the best. And if you want to find more about that, we've got some links here into the show notes. But for you, Jeremy, how can people find our community, find more about the service that you provide?
Absolutely. Well, if they want to find out how to be a great podcast guest, I put together a checklist just for them over at commandyourbrand.media/checklist. And anything on the commandyourbrand.media website would totally tell them a little bit more about what we do. And if they're interested in a personal brand side, it's over at jeremyryanslate.com. I would love to help your audience rock and roll.
Brilliant. Well, look, I really appreciate, Jeremy, the wisdom you've given. I normally, take notes in these sessions, and I've filled a whole A4 page of all this. So I know there's going to be lots of value in the show notes as well that we'll attach. So really appreciate you coming on today and helping our guests, because I still think one of the best mediums out there for driving leads is through podcasting. I think, it's something that still is free. And if you use experts like Jeremy to do it the right way, you can get some massive value out of getting on the right podcast and really, as he said before, tell your story, your message, and your call to action. And, effectively it's very low cost advertising. I don't know, Jeremy, is that sort of the way that you view it as well?
Well, and I just want to make one distinction, is like, you can look at it a bit like advertising, but it's also like from a public relations standpoint, it's huge in having people know, like, and trust you. Because if that awareness isn't there, all those other things can't happen. So the thing you will see when you're doing more interviews is, yes, you will see leads, but you'll also see opportunities coming to you. You'll see your ads converting better because people know, like, and trust you. And that's a huge thing to really create up front.
Yeah, and it sort of links back to you saying before about being that opinion leader and in that particular niche that you're targeting. So, look, it's brilliant. Great to have you on. And, thanks for sharing all your wisdom today.
Well, thanks so much for having me, Paul. I really hope this helps your audience today, man.
Cheers. Thanks, Jeremy. If you're enjoying listening to our guest stories, just letting you know we have a community for corporate escapees who are rapidly growing their dream business to find freedom. Just like you, it's called BLG Boost. You get exclusive access to a forum of like-minded peers answering your most pressing questions. You get actionable tips to solve your most common challenges. You get hundreds of trusted suppliers to save you time and money. You get member-only discounts. You get direct access to coaching by a global leader in the field and easy to implement content solving common topics mentioned in popular threads. If you are tired of being alone and are seeking the freedom of running your own business whilst meeting your financial goals, go to buildlivegive.com/webinar. In case you missed it, the link will be in the show notes. Please check it out.
Thank you for listening to the Corporate Escapees podcast, brought to you by the team at Build, Live, Give. If you found this podcast helpful, please share it with other corporate escapees. If you would like to join a community of like-minded peers, please visit www.buildlivegive.com. Until next time, thanks for listening and be brave.